I want to bring in MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel, former senior member of the Mueller probe. We do not know, Andrew, we don't have clear indications one way or the other about what may or may not be offered today from the president on the question of pardons for those who are convicted for their role in the January 6th insurrection riot. What we do know is that he came out to that sort of unscripted talk in Emancipation Hall and immediately started talking about what he calls the J6 hostages, that you will be happy with what he's going to do. He's telegraphing something. What are you sort of looking for here on that, particularly as we talk about whether Democrats want to go back and relitigate it? The sitting president of the United States clearly does, and I think is going to take some actions today that demonstrate that.
Well, I think you can look at the actions about pardons as a real sign of the significant change that this country is undergoing. They're just a perfect emblem of it. On the one hand, you can take, let's say, the pardon of Anthony Fauci offered by President Biden, where Anthony Fauci, a doctor who saved tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives and is science-based, who is offered a pardon because of repeated threats by Donald Trump and actual evidence that Donald Trump in Trump 1.0 had targeted various people. And so you have President Biden taking this preemptive step to say he shouldn't have to suffer that, worrying about that and undergoing those kinds of investigations and prosecutions. That's sort of on the one hand. And on the other, you have the now current president, President Trump, in the sort of second speech of the day saying they didn't want me to talk about January 6th and the hostages in the rotunda. But he then, as Alex said, the true id shows, and he basically says these people are hostages and you're going to see action there. I do think that if you take the vice president at his word, that they're going to try to at least distinguish between the worst of the January 6 people, the people who engaged in physical assaults of police officers, to try and at least show some modicum of appropriate discretion. But I do think the emblematic symbolism here is that you have somebody who's really trying to deal with the extraordinary situation of the incoming president and the threats, and another person who's using the pardon power as a sort of cudgel against the justice system, where so many people attacked our democracy. So you couldn't have a more striking, important difference and a symbol of it in terms of what we're going to see out of the White House in just 24 to 48 hours.
Andrew, you mentioned the president's extemporaneous remarks. This is the stuff he wasn't supposed to talk about, but that he did, having to do with January 6th. At one point, he said you're going to see a lot of action on the January 6th hostages. He also spoke in great, vivid detail about his thoughts on Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, two recipients of presidential pardons issued by President Biden on his way out. Let's just remind folks, if they had missed that sound, this is what the president said off script just a few hours ago.
But I was really going to talk about the level of, what's going on. Why are we doing this? Why are we trying to help a guy like Milley? Why are we doing Milley? He was pardoned. What he said, terrible what he said. Why are we helping some of the people? Why are we helping Liz Cheney? I mean, Liz Cheney is a disaster. She's a crying lunatic, and crying Adam Kinzinger. He's a super crying. I never saw the guy not crying. He's always crying. I looked at him. I remember years ago he was actually on my side. And then one day, when you don't want to kill people in wars, they turn against you.
Andrew, I thought it was a very revealing, just from the heart, off the top of his head. What was your reaction when you heard about the way in which he's talking about former elected members of Congress, people who I think probably rightfully President Biden zeroed in on as particularly vulnerable during a second Trump administration?
Well, one thing that I think it's important for all of us to do when we have these kinds of statements by the now president is to really focus and separate adjectives and adverbs and sort of smears from actual facts. To say somebody cried, so what? To say somebody is a disaster, so what? What are the facts? The only facts, it's not in the clip we played, is the president saying that the January 6th committee destroyed documents. There's absolutely no truth to that. You can go to the congressional website and see that far from that, they published so much of the documents. It was sort of extraordinary how much they made public for the first time, I think, ever, that I've seen that much material being published. So I think it's really important to separate his statements that are really devoid of any factual basis, and where he does make factual claims, to really have scrutiny to that, where it's really just falsehoods.
Andrew Weissmann, of course, our cherished colleague here at MSNBC, former senior member of the Mueller probe, among many other august roles he's played. Thank you, Andrew.
You're welcome.